Hello and welcome to Devil's Advocate. The Prime Minister's CII speech has sparked off widespread debate. How does the government respond to the comments? That's the issue I shall explore today with the Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission, Montek Singh Ahluwalia. Dr. Ahluwalia, let's start with the moral dimension of the Prime Minister's CII speech and come to the comments he made about profits and salaries a little later. The Prime Minister gave his speech a philosophical underpinning by quoting approvingly from John Maynard Keynes when he said that, in fact, the secret of 19th century European success was that industrialists were allowed to call the best part of the cake theirs and were theoretically free to consume it on the tacit underlying understanding that they consumed very little of it in practice. Can the Prime Minister really expect 21st century Indians to emulate 19th century precepts?
I don't think that's what he meant. I think he was referring to the fact that in every society there has to be an underlying compact, and in 19th century capitalism that was the nature of the underlying compact.
Quite right. But the problem is that to refer to the 19th century as an example of the sort of compact you should have today in the 21st century is in fact to try and ask society to go backwards in time, 150 years almost, in terms of thought, in terms of attitude. It's impossible.
No, absolutely, but I don't think that's not how I saw it at all. I just saw it as a nice example which illustrated the point that you need to build a social consensus. I mean, I'd put it another way. Industry needs to create social capital. It's what holds the system together and makes everybody feel that taking everything together, the system is working towards the common good.
So you're not saying that he was upholding the Victorian values and the Protestant ethic, in a sense, that lies behind those Victorian values as something that Indians today should emulate?
Well, I didn't read it that way, but let me say he did say that, you know, vulgar ostentation should be avoided. Now, savings is not the same thing as avoiding vulgar ostentation.
But vulgar ostentation is a matter of aesthetics.
Yes.
Calling upon captains of industry to consider the cake theoretically theirs to consume, but in practice something that they shouldn't touch, is more than ethics. That is a philosophical notion that he's selling to them of how they should consider their role. You're saying he wasn't actually asking them to emulate it, it was just an example, nothing more.
Well, that's how I read it. I mean, I saw it as an example, two separate things. One was the 19th century example, which essentially made the point that in every society, those who have tremendous advantages have to operate within a social compact, a social consensus. That was it in the 19th century.
Industrialists will be very happy to hear your interpretation, because many were a little scared that underneath this moral philosophy was an attempt to push people to try and live the lives and to adopt the attitude to consumption and to livelihood that existed in the 19th century. You're clarifying that. You're saying that's not how you read it.
That's certainly not how I read it, but it is. The Prime Minister did say that sort of vulgar display of wealth is something to be avoided. I think there's a genuine element there which I think many people in this country share.
And that's an aesthetic point. Let's come to what the Prime Minister said about profits. He says, and I quote, "Profit maximization should be within the bounds of decency and greed." First of all, what makes profits indecent and greedy? Is it just the mere size, or is it how they are generated?
I don't think that you should view any comment that goes beyond profit maximization as a criticism of profit. I mean, I think I go back to the point I made earlier. If you ask a corporate, what are they about? They claim to have many stakeholders. They don't say they're only maximizing.
But it's not a criticism of profit that the Prime Minister was making. It was a restraint on the size of profit that he was advocating, because he says profit maximization should be within the bounds of decency and greed. And I put it to you, what defines decency and greed? Is it sheer size, or is it the manner in which the profit is generated?
Well, I think the Prime Minister himself in that same speech sort of referred to the issue of, say, avoiding cartelization. So there are certain types of profit maximizing activity which an individual firm might want to undertake, which would not be socially very acceptable.
I wish you were correct, because the point about cartelization was actually a slightly separate point, although made in the same paragraph, but it was a separate point, because this point about maximization was made first. The problem is that if profits are made legally, any attempt to curb them will slow down the engine of growth. It is, in fact, a fairly substantial disincentive to entrepreneurship.
I don't think that's actually what he meant. What he meant, I'm judging in the sense I wasn't actually there. I read the speech, and I've talked to people about the speech. You know, let's take an objective, for example, such as inclusiveness. A company decides to do a little bit more of something which is socially desirable, but which slightly cuts into its profit. Now, most corporations do that. I mean, they do a bit of philanthropy, they do a bit for the neighborhood that they work in. All of that reduces profits, but that's like indicating.
There's a catch-22 here, isn't it? Because if you don't have profits, you can't be corporate and socially responsible.
Absolutely.
And therefore, if you're going to say to companies, don't maximize your profit, ipso facto, you're saying to them, you therefore can't do that much corporate social responsibility either, because you won't have the profit to do it.
No, no, I completely agree with you, and I have no doubt that the Prime Minister doesn't disagree with you either. But I'm making a limited point. One approach is you maximize profits and then you give charity out of profits. The other approach is you do things for your neighborhood which become an expenditure, which somewhat reduces your profits. Now, most corporations actually do that. If they happen to have
corporations are only willing to do that when they have sizable profits to give them the
Absolutely.
confidence to do. And the problem is that twice in this interview you said the Prime Minister didn't mean to say it. Do you think there's a sense in which perhaps the Prime Minister's language, perhaps the manner in which he arranged the structure of his argument could have been improved upon? Because he may have given many people, unintentionally, a wrong impression.
I personally think there's been a somewhat hysterical reaction, largely on the part of the media, by the way. I mean, I talked to people who were present. I don't think any of the industry people were that concerned. But the media jumped at it as if this is some backing off
well, let me
from
correct
economic
you there.
reform, which I think is just not correct.
Let me correct you there. Even people like the Secretary General of FICCI and former chairman of CII are very concerned about what the Prime Minister said about profits. And let me tell you why. I'm going to quote to you from what the Prime Minister said in July 2004 at JRD Tata's 100th birth centenary celebrations. He said, "We must unleash the full potential of individual initiative and enterprise. We must provide a new stimulus to the animal spirits of our entrepreneurs." And then he added, "When enterprising and creative individuals create wealth, they create new employment opportunities and new hope for our collective future." That's very different in tone and in content to his advice about profit maximization.
No, I don't think it's different.
There are no animal spirits in terms of curbing things.
Let's be clear. This speech was not meant to be a comprehensive discourse on all aspects of industrial policy. I mean, the CII invites him to a speech to tell the CII what should they do about inclusiveness. So he wasn't talking about a whole lot of other things.
Okay, you're explaining away the clash between what the Prime Minister said in 2004, in which I quoted, and what he said about profit maximization.
No clash, just a nuance.
Oh, well, what you call a nuance, others see as a big difference, but it wasn't the only example. You see, the Prime Minister in the same CII speech also called upon industry to resist what he called excessive remuneration, and he then went on to say it needs to be moderate in the emoluments it adopts. Now, I ask you, first of all, what is excessive remuneration and who is to be the judge of it?
Oh, it's a very good question, and you know, in the rest of the world, that's exactly the question that's being asked in the United States and in UK.
But the Prime Minister should have answered the question before advising people to restrain their remuneration.
No,
he jumped the gun.
I think let me make an important point here. I don't think the Prime Minister meant that all these very skilled, highly skilled people, young people, etc., getting good salaries in a competitive market is something to be objected to. He talked about the salaries of top executives and CEOs. Now remember, if you have a market for CEOs, so that you know CEOs move from company to company, you know what the market rate is. If you have family-controlled businesses and they vote themselves large salaries, it's not necessarily the best thing to do.
So you're saying that the Prime Minister had family-controlled businesses, and in particular the promoter of the business in mind when he talked about excessive remuneration?
I don't know what the Prime Minister had in mind, but you know, Arun Maira, a good friend of mine who's from the corporate
sector. What do you have in mind?
My view is that in a properly run corporation, there ought to be a remuneration committee of the board which determines salaries. And if managements are being competitively hired from a competitive market, the thing will sort itself out.
But all you're doing is to add another twist to the decision-making process. After all, did you or did the Prime Minister forget that first of all, salaries are determined by market forces, and secondly, companies don't pay more than they need to?
Well, that's an important question. I mean, if you look at the best performing, if you look at the 10 best performing companies of India, and you find out the salaries of the top CEOs, and then consider how many companies that are performing nowhere near as well are paying their CEOs 3 and 4 times that salary, but it's not clear that the market is functioning.
But it could be the other way around. One reason why CEOs in badly performing companies get more than CEOs in well-performing companies is because the challenge in a badly performing company is greater. You therefore need a man capable of handling it, and therefore you pay him more to take on that risk.
Absolutely.
So it works both ways.
No, but that would be true if the CEO was hired in a market process. That's not true if the CEO is essentially part of the promoting family.
Let me come bluntly to the issue that I think you hinted at a moment ago. Would you say that promoters of family-owned companies who give themselves salaries of 12, 13 or 15 crore a year, particularly when their company profits are actually going down by 11%, are the sort of people the Prime Minister had in mind?
I don't know what the Prime Minister had in mind, but I can tell you that ordinary people reading the Prime Minister's speech would have precisely that in mind.
Would Montek Singh Ahluwalia have that in mind?
I think so.
So you think family-owned companies giving promoters whacking big salary increases, particularly when the company is actually losing profits or reducing profits, is wrong?
No, it's not that it's wrong, but it seems to me that in a world of transparency, it would be very reasonable for shareholders in these companies to ask the question that if the top 10 CEOs of the country are earning this salary, would you please tell me why you deserve more?
Let me quote to you what the Prime Minister said in February 2001 to the American television station PBS. Asked what he considered to be his greatest achievement as finance minister in the 1990s, he replied, "We got government off the backs of the people of India." And then he added, "particularly off the backs of India's entrepreneurs." Today, he's putting himself back on their backs.
Absolutely not.
He's telling them what to do, how to live, what salaries to give, what profits to make.
He's responding to an invitation from the CII to talk to them.
All right, at best,
let's be clear.
They asked him for advice, but he didn't hesitate in the process to put himself slightly back on their backs. He's telling them, he's told them what profits are desirable, he's told them what salary levels are acceptable, he's told them how to live their lives, and even though you disagree with it, he's quoted John Maynard Keynes to suggest, consider the cake only theoretically yours, don't actually try and consume it.
No, I don't agree with that reading at all. In my view, he was invited by the CII to talk about how does the corporate sector address the issue of inclusiveness. And he raised a couple of points. Number one, I don't think the image of a corporation should be the only thing that matters is short-term profit. Actually, a lot of social capital expenditure designed to improve social capital is good for long-term.
You know what you're suggesting? Right? You're suggesting that he simply responded to an invitation, and therefore, in a real sense, the CII was hoisted by its own petard.
I wouldn't put it that way, but I think he was.
But you wouldn't disagree?
Well, I wouldn't say, to say hoist by their, my feeling, by the way, is that a lot of the fuss has been created by journalists looking for entertainment, wanting to find contradictions.
That's a little convenient. I'll let you get away with it. Let me put it like this, and then I'll take a break. Many people in industry believe that the new company law that the government is considering, and which could come out fairly soon, will lift restraints on directors' salaries. Now, after the Prime Minister's CII speech, will that still happen? Or does the government have second thoughts?
I think there should be no doubt in anyone's mind that the Prime Minister at no stage said or implied that there will be government regulation on salaries.
So will those restraints in company law, but will those restraints in company law therefore be lifted when the new law comes into being?
That's a separate issue. The restraints at present are on board level appointments only.
Quite right.
So there are many CEOs who, in order to get away from board level appointments, pay themselves large salaries. That's okay.
But people are listening to you very carefully, Dr. Ahluwalia. Are you saying therefore that those restraints in the old company law will continue in the new law, or might they be lifted?
Well, I haven't seen what the new company law proposals are, so I don't want to speculate. But the point I want to make here, in my own view, the regulation of company salaries is a shareholder issue. That's why I referred to a remuneration committee with independent directors, etc. on it. Is not a matter which the government should be regulating.
Okay, so what you're saying is the new company law should leave this matter increasingly to shareholders and remove the government from any regulation of director salaries or managerial remuneration.
When you refer to board level people, I haven't actually looked at what the details of the regulation
Very specifically, at the moment, government approval is needed if a single director is to be paid more than 5% of net profit, and if all directors collectively are paid more than 10% of net profit. That restraint, it is believed, was going to be removed in the new law. Will it still be?
Well, quite wrong for me to speculate.
Should it be?
I think I've not sufficiently thought about the pros and cons. But let me make the point. At present, the reference is only to board level people. You can have a CEO not on the board, and we don't regulate salary.
Okay,
right?
But the board regulation, as far as you know, and as far as you're prepared to commit, may or may not continue. You just don't know.
That's right. I don't know.
Let's take a break and let's come back and ask. Ratan Tata says the time has come for the government of India to become more bold. Does the government agree? We'll be back in a moment's time. See you after the break. Welcome back to Devil's Advocate and an interview with the Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission, Montek Singh Ahluwalia. Dr. Ahluwalia, at the recent CII National Conference, where the Prime Minister also spoke, Ratan Tata said, with specific reference to the government's goal of achieving one day 10% growth, we're not doing enough to reach this landmark. And then Mr. Tata added, India is not thinking big enough. It's not taking bold steps. Do you agree with Mr. Tata?
I think we do need to be bolder than we are if we want to achieve 10%. 10% is not easy to achieve. Only half a dozen countries have ever done it. So I would have no hesitation in saying that we need to think boldly, more boldly than mostly is done, and we have to recognize that we have to do a lot of things in order to have it happen.
What does thinking boldly and acting boldly mean?
I think let's take a simple thing like, for example, education. I mean, it's going to be a major constraint in the next 10 years if we're going to do that well in a knowledge world and in a competitive world.
So what do we need to do in educational terms to be bold and effective?
I think we need to look at doubling the percentage of our population, relevant age group that goes to university in 10 years, from 10% to 20%.
And is this a matter of resources or political will, or simply being effective and ensuring that money gets where it's intended to go?
I think certainly it's a matter of resources. Secondly, it's a matter of how do you reform the system to deliver quality. Simply putting money into university is not going to deliver first-class university education.
Reforming the system is a question of political will, isn't it?
Well, it's both institutional understanding and political will.
And that political will has to come from the top.
It has to come not just from the top, it has to come from the social consensus. We need to debate these things. We're not a command control kind of economy, so all important changes have come by talking about them and building a consensus.
Mr. Tata, in particular, in his CII intervention, mentioned roadblocks in terms of insurance and banking reforms. He says that if these restrictions in these two areas alone were to be removed, you could generate $2 to $3 billion additional dollars of investment. Now, these are reforms the government's committed to in theory. Why aren't they being implemented?
Well, I think quite a lot on the banking side is being done.
Nowhere near enough for Mr. Tata.
It's quite possibly true, but what I'm saying is that in the constraining side, I would say the biggest reform that we need from the industry point of view is to be able to deliver good quality infrastructure. We're doing work on that. We need to do more. It takes time for the results to show.
Most industrialists turn around and say that in fact India isn't putting enough effort behind infrastructure, that the government isn't giving it the priority it deserves.
I think it's certainly recognizing it as a major priority. I would agree that we need to do more. We have to do more. The states have to do more.
But why isn't more being done? If you all recognize it's needed, why isn't it being done?
But I think quite a lot has been done. I mean, you know, whether you look at roads, you look at ports, you look at airports. I feel we should do more. So basically, I mean...
Does the PM agree with you?
I would hope that he does, but I think you should ask him himself.
It's a very
let me put
strange
it this
answer.
way.
You've given me a worrying answer. You would hope that he does. It suggests that in practice you probably suspect he doesn't agree with you.
No, I just don't want to speak for the PM on this one. I mean...
But it's such an obvious
my
answer.
view on this...
Surely saying yes is the easiest thing. To suggest room for doubt is to create doubt in people's minds.
No, the PM has categorically said that infrastructure is a priority. The issue of whether we can do more is what I feel we should do more. I think many people do. I don't want to speak on how the Prime Minister feels about whether what we're doing is all we can do.
All right, Dr. Ahluwalia, you don't want to speak for the PM, but you raised a big question mark that many will actually wonder, what does that really mean? A pleasure talking to you on Devil's Advocate.
Thanks, Byron. Good seeing you.